Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro assured that the country has largely contained COVID-19 expansion and also broken an 80% of the transmission chains of the coronavirus.
There are 4 stages in this fight. The containment stage is the first, and I think we have achieved it. The second stage is the breaking of transmissions chains. I think we have partially done this in 80% of the national territory. We only have dangerous situations in Miranda, Caracas, La Guaira and Aragua states. The third stage is that of control, which I believe we must achieve in the coming weeks. Be able to decree that we have passed the stage of containment, of breaking the contagion, and we have reached the stage of control in the pandemic.
And as the country fights the COVID-19 pandemic, President Nicolás Maduro denounced the actions taken by the U.S. against Venezuela for drug trafficking.
If they want to monitor drug trafficking, they should help stop cocaine production in Colombia. Venezuela has a world record against drug trafficking. We have the world record of combating drug trafficking. If they want to stop Colombian cocaine, they need to deploy their ships in the Pacific by coming to the Caribbean, and they are letting the actual drug routes wide open.
In the middle of a pandemic that has so far infected over 160,000 people in the U.S. and killed close to 3,000, President Donald Trump has announced that the nation's Southern Command will bolster its presence in the Western Hemisphere, with an increased number of warships and troops to be stationed near Venezuela.
In cooperation with the 22 partner nations, U.S. Southern Command will increase surveillance, disruption, and seizures of drug shipments and provide additional support for eradication efforts, which are going on right now at a record pace. We're deploying additional Navy destroyers, combat ships, aircraft and helicopters, Coast Guard cutters, and Air Force surveillance aircraft, doubling our capabilities in the region.
The government of Venezuela has firmly rejected the latest provocation by the U.S. On his Twitter account, Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza said that Venezuela repudiates the lies spread by U.S. officials, but nonetheless salutes their decision to control their poorly guarded borders against drugs flowing from Colombia. The Vice President of Communication, Jorge Rodriguez, rejected U.S. new attacks on Venezuela.
The government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela energetically repudiates the statement made by Donald Trump. The Secretary of Defense, the Secretary General, and other officials of his security team, those who in a desperate attempt to divert attention to the tragic humanitarian crisis that country is experiencing, as a consequence of the erratic handling of the authorities before COVID-19, intend to attack Venezuela with outrage and threats. However, despite the aggressions and lies displayed against the Venezuelan officials, the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela welcomes the fact that, for the first time, the United States authorities are preparing to take action to protect their borders, historical, permissible, neglected, and vulnerable to the thousands of tons of drugs that enter that country, coming from the drug industry that has developed in the territory of its ally and close partner, Colombia. We hope that this time, if coca crops and new coca crops decrease in the sister Republic of Colombia, which every year beats the record of new hectares for the cultivation of coca leaf and coca processing. The robust anti-drug institutionality with which Venezuela has is set for any necessary cooperation and coordination in order to contain the advance of drug trafficking and organized crime groups in the region.
Ecuador continues to be one of the worst hit countries in Latin America by the COVID-19 pandemic, as the nation registers close to 3,000 cases. The port city of Guayaquil alone has reported 2,000 cases, effectively collapsing the health system. This in turn has led to social media being flooded with images of bodies abandoned on various sidewalks and streets. In response to this crisis, refrigerator containers were delivered to the city's main public hospitals to store the bodies that have overflowed their morgues.
Honestly, it was quite odd. I didn't know what the containers were for, but when I asked, they told me it was to put the bodies in. all the bodies that are in the hospital and that they are bringing from other places.
This is going to cause infections throughout the town, and it's going to be bad and harmful for us, the people living here. Most of us have houses made of cane, and the air comes in from even under the roofs. This is unsafe.
Chile is seeing a rise in layoffs for people who are under quarantine, a situation that appears to have the support of the government, which has tried to make workers pay for the crisis.
In the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, Chileans are forced to gather outside municipal buildings to pay for transit permits and car insurance. Congress had promised a law to push back the payment dates, but the text needed to be vetoed by the president, delaying it.
They have lied to us so much. How can we ever believe them again?
Authorities even defend a decree that authorizes companies to not pay workers' salaries during the quarantine.
The idea is to promote work stability and to prevent the suspension of activities. That is why we've allowed both sides to find alternative measures to accomplish this.
Alternative measures that turn into threats for employees. But what lies behind the decree that harms workers?
The decree creates uncertainty because if a company closes, it will not be forced to pay back salaries. And the government has pushed for a law so that workers pay for the time companies remain closed from their severance fund.
It's so-called the COVID law, and it's moving ahead in Congress under the guise of safeguarding workers' salaries.
This is part of the neoliberal way of thinking of the state, which only cares to help private companies.
The so-called COVID law is made to look like it will benefit the people who it's actually set to hurt.
This is where the project to temporarily suspend contracts comes in. It allows workers to pay the rent, the buses to stay afloat, and maybe allow the company to rebound in Q2.
This is an evil law, and what's worse is that the decree can be ignored by the courts, but if it's a law, they will have to enforce it.
Once again, private companies are untouchable.
More stories coming up, don't go away.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back to From the South. Thousands of Army reservists have been put back into service in Peru to help combat the spread of the novel coronavirus. This is the first time in Peru's history that reservists have been called back to the barracks. The decision comes after President Martín Vizcarra declared a nationwide state of emergency and an overnight curfew. Over 1,000 cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed in the country. In Brazil, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva criticized the actions of President Jair Bolsonaro in the midst of the crisis caused by the novel coronavirus, saying that his actions seek to benefit banks, leaving the population without support.
I am convinced that Bolsonaro has no psychological structure to continue governing the country. He is unbalanced, he says nothing that is coherent, and he is only concerned with keeping his fantastic happy. But he is not worried about giving answers. The people are in need of guidance. They need to receive the money. that has already been approved, and he must agree that the money arrive immediately, because if that money does not arrive, we will have more confusion in the country.
Lula also highlighted the lack of state support for the most vulnerable companies.
So far, not a cent has been sent to anyone, but banks got 200 billion reais from the nation treasury, and investment companies that are in trouble, they got 75 billion immediately.
In Brazil, it's been 56 years since the military coup that ousted President Jango Goulart and led to a 21-year dictatorship. Even under quarantine, Brazilians continue to call for justice for the victims.
The traditional walk of silence that looks back on the crimes committed during the military dictatorship could not be done this year due to the ongoing quarantine in response to the novel coronavirus. But social organizations have called on people to make the demand for justice and truth from their windows.
Our memory cannot be in quarantine. When it starts to fade, it comes back stronger. If it shrinks, it does so to gain strength and be reborn. When doors are closed, our memory finds a way.
The process that was started by the Truth Commission during the government of Dilma Rousseff was eventually halted. The crimes committed by the army were left in impunity.
Until this day, the Supreme Court insists on not giving a ruling on the amnesty's law reinterpretation. Our country has already been condemned by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights for the impunity.
Eugenia Gonzaga was dismissed by the Bolsonaro government and the special commission she led, which looked into the missing and dead during the dictatorship, was put under the leadership of people who supported that regime. The families of victims are relieving their pain after the government prohibited that death certificates be issued.
The current government is the reflection and the result of a lack of justice. When Jair Bolsonaro was a lawmaker and I headed to the Truth Commission, I started a process against him for his support of torturers, which didn't get far. He was elected president as he lauded the dictatorship, supporting torture and death. And now we have to be led by a government that has zero compromise with human rights.
At the moment, Bolsonaro faces the worst crisis of his administration. His defense of the economy, about people's lives, cost him the support of allied governors and lawmakers, as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread in the nation.
Caribbean countries are implementing strict measures, including stay-at-home orders and the closure of borders, to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, as the region has 2,309 cases to date. However, the Caribbean Public Health Agency has advised it is preparing for second and third waves of the virus once those measures are lifted.
Because we are aware that there will be second and third waves. And so we need to do a risk profile for those who will be affected by the second and third waves. Because if you think about it, with all of these measures that are trying to protect those persons with chronic diseases, lung conditions, persons who are older, there will be some people who will not be exposed. But if we open our borders, or we increase the traffic from countries that still have transmission, there will be then an inject of another set of disease for those persons who have not had it before. So it's going to be important that we do that, not just demographic, but epidemiological profile.
Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez has thanked the various countries around the world that have called for an end to the U.S. blockade against Cuba. He took to Twitter to say that the blockade is a, quote, genocidal policy causing severe economic and humanitarian damages to our country. The Secretary General of the Organization of American States recently called for coercive unilateral measures against various countries to be lifted in order to guarantee their access to food and medicine amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The Cuban ambassador to China has heavily denounced that a shipment of Chinese aid was blocked from reaching Havana due to U.S. sanctions. In a statement on the embassy's website, Cuban Ambassador Carlos Miguel Pereira described how the U.S. company hired by Chinese tycoon Jack Ma to deliver a shipment of masks and COVID-19 test kits to Cuba had backed out last minute due to U.S. regulations described in the Helms-Burton Act. Jack Ma, who is the founder of tech company Alibaba, has managed to deliver tons of medical aid to more than 50 countries, including the U.S. Senegal has announced that the former president of the French football club Marseille, Pape Diouf, has died aged 68 after contracting coronavirus. The Senegalese was president between 2005 and 2009 when Marseille reached 2 French Cup finals.
Yesterday, Tuesday, March 31st, 2020, at 7:43 p.m., Senegal registered its first case of death related to COVID-19 in the person of Mr. Mababa Diouf, better known as Pape Diouf, on behalf of the Minister of Health and Social Action, currently meeting in the Council of Ministers, and on behalf of the President of the Republic, His Excellency Macky Sall, the government and the people of Senegal, I extend my heartfelt condolences to his family, loved ones, and the entire nation.
And following the announcement of Pape Diouf's death, tributes from supporters of the club immediately started to pour in.
We supporters of Olympique de Marseille in Senegal have lost a great man. Not only was Pape Diouf Senegalese, but on top of that, he was the first black president of an elite club from the Big Five championships. Pape Diouf was a great example for us. He was also a reference, because he was the perfect example of a son of Senegal who succeeded, who left for Europe to establish himself in journalism, in his work as a player's agent, and also in his management of Olympique de Marseille.
We're taking one last break, but stay with us. Welcome back. Spain has reached a grim milestone as the country recorded its highest daily death toll, taking the total number of fatalities to over 10,000.
Since the beginning of the epidemic, there have been 10,003 deaths in Spain, and the increase in the number of deaths reported yesterday to the Alert Coordination Center was 950.
The United Kingdom reported on Wednesday the biggest one-day jump in coronavirus cases, prompting media to criticize Prime Minister Boris Johnson over his handling of the crisis. Our correspondent Pablo Navarrete in London has the details.
Figures released yesterday, 1st of April, by the British government show that 563 people died in a 24-hour period due to coronavirus or COVID-19, which is the biggest amount of deaths since reporting began. Now this takes the number of people in the UK who have died due to the virus to 2,352, and it's growing at an exponential rate now. Some have argued that it's showing a larger amount of deaths at this point than Italy had at the same point. Now the British government has increased its popularity in the polls, according to some pollsters, although yesterday saw the first time that it was criticised in various newspapers for its strategy on how to deal with the virus. Now initially, as we know, the British government seemed to be pushing for herd immunity, letting the virus spread amongst the population. This has changed, although a clip yesterday on the BBC went viral showing a BBC presenter showing surprise at the fact that the government had announced only 30 ventilators would be ready for this weekend, when it has said that 30,000 are needed to deal with the pandemic. So the British government seems to be coming under increasing media scrutiny over how it's dealing with the crisis, and the number of deaths in Britain is going up at an alarming rate.
We thank Pablo Navarrete for that report. The COP26 climate conference, set to take place in Glasgow, Scotland later this year, has been postponed due to the coronavirus crisis. In a Twitter post, Alok Sharma, Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, said a new date would be soon set for the climate summit. He added, "The world is facing an unprecedented global challenge, and countries are rightly focusing on fighting COVID-19. Due to this, COP26 has been postponed. The Scottish event campus where the COP26 was to be held is currently being turned into a COVID-19 emergency hospital. Italy has extended its economically crippling lockdown until April 13th to help curb the coronavirus infections that have claimed more than 13,000 lives.
This additional effort that I am asking you to undertake will allow us to begin to assess a perspective with the recommendation from our experts of the Scientific Technical Committee. As soon as the data consolidate, when the board of experts will allow us to do so, we will start planning a relaxation of the measures. I cannot tell you, however, that it will be on the 14th of April, because we are not able to know. When we have more data, evaluating what will happen with the epidemiological curve in the next few days, in the next 2 weeks, we will obviously begin to consider the prospect of entering Phase 2. Phase 2 is to coexist with the virus, and then take measures, let's say, that will slowly lead to relaxing the lockdown, and then enter into Phase 3, that is the exit from the emergency phase.
The French government has announced that 3.6 million employees have applied for partial unemployment. If granted, this means that the state will pay 70% of their wages for hours that employees are furloughed during the COVID-19 pandemic.
En ce qui concerne le chômage partiel,
337,000 companies have applied, the vast majority of which are small businesses. And these applications concern 3.6 million employees. So the protective partial unemployment system that we have put in place to avoid redundancies and to prepare for the recovery by protecting jobs and skills is on the rise. And I think we can be proud to have such a protective system in France. We want to save jobs, allow for skills to be retained, and therefore also prepare the next generation of workers after the health crisis.
The president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, has threatened to order security forces to shoot dead those he considers to be troublemakers during the pandemic.
If you leftists want shooting, sure. If you want hitting, I will not hesitate. My orders are for the police, the military, and the villages in case there's trouble and there's an occasion where they fight and your life is threatened. Shoot them dead.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has gone into self-isolation after a meeting last week with a doctor who later tested positive for COVID-19.
The situation in the country is getting more difficult, and the situation around coronavirus in the world is very difficult. 883,000 people have already become infected, and on the territory of Russia, according to the latest data that I have, there are 2,777 cases of the disease.
An Afghan government delegation has met with the Taliban for the first time to discuss a prisoner swap aimed at kickstarting a peace process. The two sides held direct negotiations in Kabul about the release of Afghan national defense and security force personnel as well as Taliban prisoners. The United States signed a deal with the Taliban in February that promised the withdrawal of U.S. and foreign troops from Afghanistan by July of next year if the Taliban starts talks with the Afghan government. But the deal required the government, which didn't sign the deal, to free 5,000 Taliban prisoners and for the group to release 1,000 pro-government prisoners in return.
A technical team of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan hosted Taliban representatives in Kabul yesterday. The issues of the prisoners' release were discussed in the face-to-face meeting, and it was decided that the discussions continue today. The ICRC was present as observers in yesterday's meeting.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media as well. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Until next time.